In tonight's news edition, the Jordan Week in Nairobi opens, giving businesses a foothold in the Kenyan market. Plans to evacuate besieged rebel districts of Aleppo are under threat as renewed airstrikes and shelling rock the city. And temperatures continue to dip with gusty winds and downpours as a depression affects the kingdom. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King received a phone call from Moroccan monarch Mohammed VI. The two leaders discussed the current situation in the region as well as international developments. They also reviewed Jordanian-Moroccan ties and means to further boost cooperation in various fields. Prime Minister Defense Minister Hani Mulki welcomed Austrian Defense Minister Hans-Peter Doskozl and discussed cementing military and defense ties. They also talked about training and exchange expertise between the armed forces of the two countries, in addition to the situation in the Middle East. Mulki said Jordan had political solutions to regional crises. The Austrian minister said his country recognized the huge burden placed on Jordan for hosting Syrian refugees and would work through the European Union to support the kingdom in this regard. He said Austria would also organize a meeting of Austrian businessmen at the Jordanian embassy in Vienna in the next 3 months to explore investment prospects in the kingdom and areas of joint cooperation. Prime Minister Hani Mulki opened the Conference of Chief Executive Officers of the e-Government program organized by the Ministry of Information and Communications Technology. Attending the opening ceremony were Her Royal Highness Princess Sumaya bint al-Hassan, Minister of Information and Communications Technology Majd Shweke, and CEOs of the program at ministries and government departments. The conference aims to exchange expertise and ideas on ways and means to promote e-government. The Prime Minister toured the Unified Government Data Center affiliated with the National Information Technology Center and checked on progress of its work. Deputizing for His Majesty the King, Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs and Minister of State for Investment Affairs, Jawad Al-Anani, inaugurated the Jordan Week in Nairobi, Kenya. Some 180 business people and more than 60 Jordanian companies representing the construction, mining, food, pharmaceutical, and a number of other sectors are taking part in the 4-day week, the first of its kind for Jordan to be held in Africa. The event, co-organized by the Jordan Investment Commission and East Amman Industrial Investors Association, aims at finding new markets for Jordanian products through acquainting East African countries with the kingdom's industrial and service products. On the sidelines of the event, Anani attended the signing of agreements and memoranda of understanding between Jordan and Kenya in several sectors. Plans to evacuate besieged rebel districts of Aleppo were under threat as renewed airstrikes and shelling rocked the city. Iran, one of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's main backers in the battle, imposed new conditions. Tehran said it wanted the simultaneous evacuation of wounded from 2 villages besieged by rebel fighters. Here's more.
The buses have arrived, but the people haven't. The planned evacuation of rebel districts in Aleppo has stalled as airstrikes and heavy shelling hit the city. Local media said it could now be delayed until Thursday. Iran is said to have imposed new conditions on the deal. UN forces say they want a simultaneous evacuation of wounded from nearby rebel-held villages. The ceasefire, brokered on Tuesday by Russia and Turkey, was intended to end years of fighting in the divided city, handing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad his biggest victory in more than 5 years of war. Turkey is accusing Syrian government forces and others of trying to obstruct the evacuation. The Turkish foreign minister says they're talking to Russia and Iran to try to ensure the ceasefire holds, despite efforts by the Syrian government to prevent it. A monitoring group says the truce appears to have collapsed. Russia explaining government forces were responding to rebel attacks and that resistance was likely to end in the next 2 or 3 days. Around 15,000 civilians are still thought to be waiting to leave the area. Tens of thousands have already fled. The UN calling the crisis a complete meltdown of humanity.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said talks with the United States on Syria were fruitless. Earlier, Lavrov told a news conference that rebel resistance in Aleppo is likely to end in the next 2 to 3 days. He said he hoped the situation in Aleppo would be resolved in the next few days. Lavrov said Russia and Syrian government forces had created humanitarian corridors in Aleppo, and tens of thousands of civilians were leaving or have already left. The Russian minister said passages were also created for the rebels who were offered to leave and given safety guarantees. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan accused Syrian government forces of breaking a ceasefire deal in Aleppo. But he said Ankara is still making efforts to create a corridor to evacuate people from the Syrian city. Addressing a group of local administrators in Ankara, Erdogan said he would speak later by phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin about the situation in Aleppo, which he described as very fragile. He also said preparations were complete for evacuees from Aleppo to come to Idlib in Syria and to Turkey. Meanwhile, Turkey's Humanitarian Relief Foundation launched a campaign for tens of thousands of civilians stranded in East Aleppo. Around 100 trucks carrying sacks of flour, food rations, and winter clothes headed for the border. Turkish officials said the aid will be loaded to United Nations warehouses in Antakya in southeast Turkey, close to the border, and delivered to evacuees from Aleppo once a ceasefire in the war-ravaged city goes into effect. Iraqi special forces said they recaptured a new district of eastern Mosul, expanding the army's foothold in the area. A commander of the elite counter-terrorism service said troops had liberated and cleared out Al-Falah district in the eastern side of the city. The forces known as the Golden Division also discovered a center where Daesh terrorists were trained. A spokesperson said earlier that several thousand Iraqi police were ready to join the assault against Daesh in East Mosul, the biggest city under the group's control in Iraq and Syria. Israeli police shot and killed a Palestinian in occupied East Jerusalem. The occupation authorities said the man stabbed and wounded a police officer before he was shot and fatally wounded by policemen at the scene. A police spokesman said the suspected stabber used a screwdriver in the incident that took place at the heavily patrolled Lions Gate of East Jerusalem. The incident was the latest sign of ongoing violence that Palestinians blame on stalled peace talks and Israeli settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank. Also today, Israeli troops arrested 19 Palestinians in daily raids across the West Bank. The French lower house of parliament voted to extend the country's state of emergency until July 15, 2017, as France remains on high alert against the threat of terror attacks. The Interior Minister asked the Parliament to pass the measure, which received 288 votes for and 32 against. Political parties are keen to show they are getting a grip on the threat of attacks as France prepares for presidential elections in 2017. Surfing champion Mike Fanning found himself catching waves under a magical northern light sky in Norway. Fanning took the trip together with photographers who managed to capture the rare experience on camera. The results of the adventure can be seen in a video released by Red Bull Media showing the 35-year-old athlete riding waves under the vivid aurora lights. In an announcement in early December, the International Olympic Committee declared that cheerleading would receive provisional recognition as an Olympic sport. The discipline will now be able to tap into IOC funding and take part in a number of programs, including athlete development and anti-doping. At the end of their 3-year provisional recognition period, they can apply to become part of the Olympic Games sports program. The International Cheer Union currently has over 100 national federations and nearly 4.5 million registered athletes. And finally, temperatures continue to dip with gusty and very cold winds and downpours across many areas as a depression affects the kingdom. The rainfall will continue accompanied by thunder and lightning and occasional hail showers, and light snow is also expected on elevations over 1,000 meters. The weatherman said it will continue to be very cold and rainy tonight with southwesterly gusty winds. Frost formation is in the forecast after midnight in the northern parts of the kingdom. Tomorrow, the low-pressure system will continue to affect the kingdom, bringing high winds and more rain across most regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect milder conditions, while winds will be northerly brisk and the seas choppy. The Meteorology Department warned against flash floods in low-lying areas, and the Civil Defense Department issued safety regulations during the cold and raining weather. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. The Jordan Week in Nairobi opens, giving businesses a foothold in the Kenyan market. Plans to evacuate besieged rebel districts of Aleppo are under threat as renewed airstrikes and shelling rock the city. Temperatures continue to dip with gusty winds and downpours as a depression affects the kingdom. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khel. Thank you for watching and have a good night.